Hello, and welcome to another edition of Adapt2Changes Interview Series. My name is Bret Rachlin, and today I'm joined by my longtime friend and colleague, Rachel Simon. How are you, Rachel?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Well, thanks again for taking some time today with me to talk about some of the changes that have gone on and across your career and how you've adapted to them. And I'd like to start out by just talking a little bit about your career evolution. I know from our previous conversations, starting, your career in nonprofit and then ultimately evolving into marketing. I'm really curious, how you got started in nonprofit and then what made you kind of make those changes and how you adapted to them.
Sure. It's kind of a funny story, I think. So I have degrees in fields that have absolutely nothing to do with what I do now. I have a undergrad in religion, and I have a master's in Jewish studies. And I 100% thought I was going to go into academics and go get my PhD and go be a professor. And then in grad school, I was like, oh no, I can't do this anymore. So I ended up taking those and going into Jewish communal service when I moved here to Atlanta in 1999. So I worked at the Jewish Community Center for almost 7 years, and then moved over to Jewish Family and Career Services, where I worked for 8 years, so 15 years in nonprofit. Really the crux and where I like to kind of think about what that encompassed was it was all about community building. So working with, putting courses together, workshops, seminars, eventually working to help sort of connect with various pockets of the community. And it was I got a lot of marketing experience because I had to do it myself. We didn't really have a very, sophisticated marketing machine like there is now in a lot of nonprofits. So if you were running programs, you were the one putting the flyers together, getting the people to, sign up, sending out the emails, and whatnot. So it was kind of on the ground learning over the years. But, eventually I kind of was a part of the marketing department through one of my positions, and got more and more interested in social media as a user, and felt like we really weren't doing enough, like we weren't taking full advantage of the opportunity to build community and build sort of a name on Facebook. Really was the best one. And so I was like, can I do it? And that's really where I kind of transitioned more into a more strict marketing role from sort of the more community focus.
Well, it's a great story. And what I find interesting about that, a couple things. And one thing I really want to come back to is your comment about learning. So let's definitely come back to that, because I think there's an importance around continuous learning to help you kind of adapt through changes. But the comment you made about the fact that you were kind of, you didn't have a lot of resources as part of the role. You were having to do certain marketing activities anyway from a nonprofit perspective, and you kind of just jumped in and did that. Do you think was it your nature that allowed you to kind of just jump in and do that? Like, did you resist that at all? Or did you say, look, this is the job. I know I was thinking more about nonprofit and the fact that I would just, help build a community, which you could argue building a community is certainly a marketing oriented activity as well, but it wasn't under the label of marketing. How did you find yourself to become open to those marketing activities? Did you just jump in because that's the way you are? Or do you think you said, listen, I got to buckle down if I'm going to do my job well? Let me really take this seriously and get into it.
I think it's a little bit of both. So, in my first position at the Jewish Community Center, I worked in the department where we did like adult Jewish education classes. And so if you wanted people to come, you had to get those people there. And really the marketing department, the formal marketing department, their main function was just putting out printed collateral. So we'd work with them to get like a catalog or a brochure together. But other than that piece of printed collateral, everything else we had to do ourselves. There was no, email marketing. There was obviously no social media in the early 2000s. And so it was like, you want people to come, you gotta find them. And we all kind of ran our own, each department. I mean, it's, you think about it now and it's just like, oh my God, how did we even function? We all had our own separate databases. We all managed our own separate databases. Like other departments, there was no centralized anything.
Right.
And again, like now that just seems absolutely like insane. No marketer would ever allow that to happen, but that's the way it was back in the, back in the olden days, where, we all, I think, remember Microsoft Access?
Sure.
That's the database. I was like an Access pro. Now I have absolutely no idea how to use it. But at the time I was like the queen of Access.
Well, I think that's really, I like your answer in terms of the fact that it was a combination of both. And I think that the fact that to succeed in your role, you had to take on that marketing function. You had to promote. It was not just about, setting up the events and people will come. You had to promote that event and communicate that, to them. One of the things that is, I think important when thinking about how you evolve in your role from a career perspective is when you are taking on new things, how did you adjust to those new technologies? I mean, did you resist it first, or did you pretty much just jump into those like Microsoft Access or eventually social media? And did the social media part, was it because you were more comfortable on a personal level and then figured out, hey, I could probably exploit this for business purposes too? How did you kind of go through the thought process of which tools you would use and how you were going to, really get them going to succeed in your job?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, back in the beginning, I mean, my first email address was in 2000. Like, so I didn't even have an email address until when I first started my job at the JCC. So I think part of it is like the tools come along and then you figure out how can I use them. So initially, the majority of communication was like calling people and asking them to get their friends to come, and sending out mailers. So we'd send out letters and flyers and send out more. I remember when I first started working, I'd be like, another mailing needs to go out. But then email kind of came in. And so then we could start to use email. And then, new technologies come in and you realize that they can be more efficient and you figure out, well, okay, I need to adapt and get on this because it's going to take a lot less time than picking up the phone and calling 50 people. So I think it's partly that. It's like you have to be open to what's next, and figure out, does it make sense to use? Now, again, the basics, of course, it makes perfect sense to use email, and social media came along and certain channels it makes perfect sense to. Others, I think now we have so many options. You have to figure out what is the best way to reach your audience versus I'm going to do everything.
So with that being said, because I mean, there are far more options now than there were 15 years ago. I mean, with the proliferation of MarTech apps that are out there, and there's over 7,000 or 8,000 marketing technology applications, which, I guess it can be good because you can find some diamonds in the rough. But at this point, beyond the basics between email, marketing automation, a social media platform, a CRM, a couple other ones, everything else is kind of an add-on to that, in terms of making something easier. And it is hard to determine, how do you evaluate those types of tools today to make sure you're not wasting too much time trying to use one? And how do you determine if one's good and it's going to become part of your repertoire?
Yeah, I think again, I think you have to look at where do my skills lie? Because again, back 15, 20 years ago, I could learn to use email and learn to use Access and learn to use social media. But, today it's like, I'm not an SEO expert. I'm not going to claim to know how to, do pay-per-click, because there's so many things that you could possibly do. You almost have to specialize and then outsource or find resources to help with the others, because I think the diamond in the rough of the person who is good at everything, those people are very few and far between.
Absolutely. So that's actually an interesting point, is that how do you evaluate then others? Because if you need to bring in other team members, whether they're colleagues, people working for you, people working with you, even people working above you in different, organizations, how do you evaluate where they are kind of on the innovation, timeline? Because, it's, if you go work with people who are so, far on the innovation timeline and trying to do the cutting edge, they may not actually be, effective at the things that you just absolutely need to get done. However, if you work with somebody who's behind, that's going to be a detriment to your work and anybody you're working with. So how do you kind of evaluate them in terms of where they are? Like, what's that happy medium in terms of finding somebody who can use the tools really well, is thinking about where things are going, because buyers are constantly changing in terms of how they engage with you, but is not so far ahead that they are ahead of even where their buyers are and aren't going to be effective? How do you kind of navigate through those deals?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think honestly, you kind of almost have to go with your gut. I mean, you generally get a good sense of people who you feel like you could work well with, who has a similar philosophy uh, to you. Uh, at the same time, I think it's important to find people that maybe are going to push you a little bit, um, and kind of not push the envelope, but ask the right questions and maybe be a little bit more, take a few more risks than I would be comfortable with, again, because it's not my area of expertise. But a lot of it is, and again, going all the way back to the beginning, it's so much about relationships. And look, you and I worked together because we knew each other and we had a relationship, and you knew, you felt comfortable like bringing me into a client. People, or if there's certain people who will recommend someone to you, that recommendation holds a lot of weight.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of that, who and you have to listen to your gut. If someone feels like that's not going to be the right fit for me, that's probably pretty true.
That's right. And the other thing that, especially this includes between you and me, is the element of trust. Okay. And,
Mm-hmm.
and also earning that trust over time. So just using the two of us as an example, I had trust in you from the moment we started working together, but that trust also grew because we realized that we could rely on each other, as we were working on projects together. You could trust me and vice versa. And that trust is consistently earned over time. And I think when you can trust the people that you're working with, especially across disparate applications or disparate types of knowledge, that it's critical for success, and helps everybody kind of adapt to those changes, better together, because you have that element of trust. But living up to what you say you're going to do is really, really important through those programs.
Exactly. And exceeding it too. I think
Right.
that is really, do this and then get to here, because then you're really going to have, exceeding those expectations is going to get you very far with people who are going to refer you for doing good work, and sort of following through on and beyond. Um, One thing, just thinking also about, finding the right people is, at least I do, when I first launched my company, I created my own website in Squarespace. I had never done a website before. It was okay. It was passable. It wasn't a disaster, but it was nothing great. But as I needed it to do more, the platform was not functional to be more sophisticated.
Right.
Nothing against Squarespace, but it's a pretty simple platform. So if you need to do something, like I wanted to put a chart, like a comparison chart, I couldn't even do that. And so, that was where I was like, I need to outsource this. And it's worth spending some money and investing some resources to get a much better and much more dynamic product in the end. And so the firm that I use to design my website, I get compliments all the time about how good, how professional it looks, how easy it is to navigate. I couldn't have done that myself. So kind of know what you can do, and don't be afraid to outsource the rest and invest a little invest a little finances in it to get a much, much better product.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, it's investing in yourself and your business, and knowing kind of where you need to outsource and where things that you can do yourself. But I think that part of evolving is about investing in yourself and that continuous learning. And some of it you can do through reading, but sometimes you need to take courses Sometimes you need to work with
Mm-hmm.
other people who are going to help you along, or you're going to have them work with you on projects that you could try to do yourself and make a little bit more money, but it'd be better to have a team member who excels at that a little bit more, and then you can learn from them and possibly do it down the line. So I think that all fits in the same realm. So Rachel, take me through though, when you decided to go from nonprofit to marketing, it's likely it wasn't as big a change since you're already doing a lot of marketing. But one of the changes was that you were starting to have clients, which is different from working for an organization. Take me through a little bit about that. And really, how did you adjust to having clients? And was that a difficult adjustment for you? And how did you kind of hone your skills to manage client expectations?
That's a really good question. I think it was different, but not different because, and I think I said this before, so much of my career was focused on relationships. And so, and that was, again, in nonprofit, you can think of almost the client as the stakeholder, whether that's somebody coming to programs, somebody who is donating money, a donor, a funder. If you have a grant that's happening, you have to think about all of those relationships almost in a client, parameter. And so I think that prepared me for a pretty easy transition to be working on that client, in that client relationship.
Sure.
Yeah. So now I just love working with my clients because I learned so much from them. Too, I've met so many interesting people, gotten to work with people in a lot of different fields. So I really find the client relationship to be really fun.
Well, one of the things that I found, and this was actually when we first started working together, a little over 5 years ago, was how open-minded you were. I felt that was, and I think that's a key to kind of adapting to new things, and adapting to changes. And we were having this conversation initially, dropping off, our kids to go to overnight camp. And we were talking about, social selling, which is much of the work that you're doing, now for your, your specific clients in terms of the new business that you started in the course of the past couple of years. And I remember you, again, your initial reaction was you were questioning. You're like, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by this, Bret, but it was very quick after that you just started learning things on your own, and you were coming back to me and saying, what about this? What about that? How can we do this better? And I found that, and that's part of the reason why we continued to work together, because it was a much a give and take. You were contributing a lot to those conversations and growing on your own into an entire business on your own, specifically around something like that. But what are your thoughts in terms of being open-minded and how important that is to being able to kind of adapt to changes, adapt to new things? And do you think that's something that, were you just born with that, or is that something that you kind of honed over your career?
I think it's really important to be open-minded and not, because, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. The truth is that if I didn't have that approach, I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing now. I mean, now again, sometimes you need somebody to push you. I mean, and thankfully, my husband was the one who really pushed me, because he's like, look, you've been in this job for 8 years. I was working part-time nonprofit, which does not pay the bills so well. Nothing against the nonprofit world, but it's not, you're not making millions in it, particularly part-time. And he's like, you're kind of bored. I've been doing the same stuff for a couple of years. And he kind of challenged me to see the fact that I could take the skills that I learned there and go out on my own and do it myself. And took me a couple months to wrap my head around it, and I think build the confidence that I could do it. But here we are 5 years later. And throughout the whole process of, kind of starting in general marketing consulting, back in 2015, again, probably when we had that conversation, I was like, well, I don't know anything about social selling. And one of my clients, in a call we had once, he's like, got to fake it till you make it. I'm like, you sound, you need to sound like you know what you're talking about and start doing it. And then you will see that you can make it happen. So
That's
kind of
right.
not getting oh, I don't have a marketing degree. I'm not I haven't done this before. Like, it's a lot of marketing is pretty much common sense. The strategy part of it, I'd say the more technical stuff obviously requires a lot more technical knowledge, but it doesn't take how you want to be communicated with, and so think about using that knowledge to kind of spread that approach to helping your clients
Well,
communicate.
you brought up something really interesting though about your husband kind of encouraging you. You use the term push you, to and challenge you to be able to do something in this area and to, kind of do more in terms of your capability was greater than what you were currently doing, and you've certainly demonstrated that over the past 5 years, Rachel. Obviously, and I do want to talk a little bit more about how you've evolved the new business that you're doing, because I do want to talk a little bit about that, but there's an old saying, as a runner, I've done a couple marathons, a lot of half marathons. And one of the sayings was that, when you get to a point when you're training and you do, let's say you run 10 miles, you can always, if you had to, do double the amount of miles that you just ran. You
Hmm.
had that capability if you had to, not necessarily if someone was chasing you, but if someone said you have to do 20 miles today, you could gut it out and do it. And I think there's something to be said for, we as human beings all have greater capability than I think we do at many times, and um, it takes encouragement from others, but also us to be able to be uncomfortable, to recognize that we can challenge ourselves to try to take that to the next level. And there's something there about that uncomfortableness that really also relates, in my opinion, to adapting to changes, and really the concept of resilience. Because I think from my research and really just from my own experiences, I've noticed that in times when I've struggled, once I can overcome those struggles, that makes me stronger going forward in terms of feeling more confident that I can accomplish something or deal with that issue. And I think that the idea that you were pushed into it, there was some concern there, probably in that internal, things going on in your mind, the internal voice in your mind saying, slow down, don't do this, versus the other part of you that's saying, I can do this. My husband thinks I can do this. Brett thinks I can do this. Other people think I can do this. Let me, that you're fighting that. Let me go out and do that. I think that's important for people to understand, that when they do have times of challenge or times of change, it's natural to kind of say no. But if they are open-minded, recognize that they can be resilient and say yes, they can accomplish a lot. Does that all make sense?
I think so, yeah. And I also think a lot of times, you have other people see things in you before you can see them in yourself. Um, and that's okay. I mean, so my husband saw some potential in me, and it took me a little time for me to again gain the confidence and believe that I could see it myself. But um, I think kind of having some patience with yourself is okay too. That maybe I'm not ready, maybe this isn't the right time. Again, for me, because I wasn't, it was not as much pressure to supplement my income because my income was not a lot. That being said, very quickly, not only did I make what I had been making in my part-time job, but I more than surpassed it within a couple of months. So I think seeing that also gave me more confidence in that, okay, I can totally do this, and I'm contributing more to my family, and I'm really enjoying the flexibility that I have,
Right.
working for myself. I was pretty flexible before, but sure is nice not having to drive to an office, even though it wasn't that far from my house, to be able to be flexible with my kid's schedule as needed. And there's a lot of really great things besides sort of the professional side that I've been able to reap the benefits of, I think, over the last couple of years.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned patience and having patience in yourself. That actually relates to another concept. And I've done a lot of work around how buyers buy. And oftentimes it's around how your target buyers buy, but sometimes you yourself are the target buyer. Like if you're going through a change, you have to understand how you are going to deal with that change, and knowing yourself. So for example, if you're the type of person that is, really laid back and easygoing and doesn't sweat the small stuff, you take a certain approach to a new challenge in one way. Whereas if you're another person, like I'm pretty detail oriented and want to kind of understand and prepare very well when I'm taking on something new, I tend to potentially overanalyze some of those things. So it's sometimes understanding where you are in the journey that you're on, and then taking a step back and having some patience and being able to sell yourself on that change and doing what's right for you. And it sounds like what was great for your situation is that you had the patience of to say, okay, I think I can do this. Let me get started. And then you were rewarded with that fairly quickly, because you maintained the same flexibility you kind of had before, maybe even gained some more of it, and you were making more money. So, I mean, what a winning combination that was in terms of getting started.
Yes, agreed. I mean, the more money is a good thing,
Right.
especially when we have to pay for kids' sleepaway camp, which is,
Exactly. So talk to me a little bit about this opportunity that you really kind of homed in on around, focusing on LinkedIn and helping certain clients. Talk a little bit about that, because that's a specialization of the area that you were doing in terms of, and you're still doing some, general consulting around social media and email marketing as well. But take me through how you decided to really focus your business in this particular area, and how that's going as you've grown from having your basic Squarespace website to a now more professional website, that you've outsourced.
So, well, we worked on one client together where the client CEO had been in the industry for many years and had never really done anything with LinkedIn. And initially, I was doing some email marketing for them, and the idea was to put in an email, connect with our CEO on LinkedIn. And when we looked at his profile, he had 12 LinkedIn connections. And I was for sure not a LinkedIn expert at the time, but even knew that was not going to work. We can't promote that when it looks like the guy never, ever, ever looks at LinkedIn. And so started building his network and posting content and doing outreach for him, just a quick intro messaging. And very quickly saw that there was so much opportunity here for peer-to-peer connection, for him to be connecting with C-suite of his targets. And within the first year of doing that, they anecdotally, I think, reported on 8 new clients that they got acquired really through LinkedIn prospecting. And so that was really what sold me. I was like, this is an untapped market here.
Right. So real quick on that, though, I'm curious, because I obviously know the gentleman you're talking about. And he is, I would say either an older Gen Xer or probably a baby boomer, from a
younger baby boomer.
A younger baby boomer from an age perspective. And how did you help him manage through that change? I'm sure after you started, generating opportunities and revenue for him, it was fairly easy. But was there some reluctance on his part to get involved, and how did you help him overcome that?
That's a good question. I think initially he was just like, fine, do whatever you want. And, I logged into his LinkedIn account and would send connection requests and this, that, and the other. But then he started seeing what some of the results were. And then he got really into it. So he would start sending out messages. And sometimes I'd be like, oh no, he's going rogue. He'd send out a bunch of connection requests and a bunch of messages and accept tons of people. Now, looking back now, I'm not sure that it was great to accept all these people because they're not all necessarily the right targets for him. But yeah, he really got into it, and continues to see the benefits. And the cool thing was, after we really built his network, and now we're talking from 12 to, close to 9,000 people in his network, we were able to utilize it in a lot of interesting ways. So we were able to target people, based on where they worked or what their titles were, or where they were geographically, based on, where certain needs might be in different parts of the country. So the business development team saw this as a huge value add in their toolbox as far as, you know, prospecting was concerned.
Right.
And I do not, I'm not, there's a lot of LinkedIn lead generation companies out there. My philosophy is that this is a tool in the overall business development and lead generation toolkit, but you got to have multiple points of entry here.
Yep.
You can't just depend on LinkedIn to do your prospecting.
One interesting thing you just talked about, though, in terms of helping him overcome any potential fears of or him just embracing the idea of his LinkedIn presence and how you're going to help promote him on there, is that there were incrementally some small wins and I think that's really important in terms of when you're going through a change or you're concerned about something, and you can take a step back and start to get some small wins versus thinking through you have to have this big gigantic win. I'll use running again as an example. No one goes out and starts to run a marathon tomorrow. It's not like you would just start, I'm going to run a marathon, I'm going to go run 26 miles, the next day. You start out with starting to run 3 miles, at a time, and maybe start doing 3 miles 3 times a week, and then you build up from there. So by the time you're ultimately running 26.2 miles, you've built up all of these wins in terms of how many miles you've accomplished. I think it's similar in terms of other issues. Sometimes we see things as a big change, which is really a lot of little changes. And if we can work through those little changes incrementally, you have several small wins as you go. If something takes a little bit longer, that's okay, because it's smaller. It's not a deal breaker or anything like that. You can overcome it. That is a better path if you can frame your mind around that in terms of helping to adapt to that change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and using this guy as the example, I mean, a small win can be something as simple as having a connection into a target that they didn't have before.
Exactly.
Right. So the new clients is like the top of the top. That's the icing on the cake. But to be able to, maybe have some new points of entry versus cold calling, that there's a lot of value there.
So tell me a little bit about some of your newer clients that are focused
Sure.
on this, and how, and obviously I think that they're probably similar to this gentleman we've been talking about in terms of where they are on the spectrum from a LinkedIn standpoint, and how have you kind of helped them overcome some of those changes and really embrace, this area of marketing that you're specializing in?
Sure. So, just to kind of wrap up this story, working with the first client, realizing there's a lot of opportunity here, I kind of got a few more people under my belt, and then in the beginning of 2018, incorporated my company, Connect the Dots Digital, where we specifically focus on LinkedIn. And so in the last couple of years, I've worked with a number of people in healthcare, some startups, some, kind of more higher ups, and, some folks in marketing. I've kind of all over the place, but what I'm working on now, I have a few, probably about a good number, majority of my current clients are professionals who have been in their industries for many years. So they have, they're really well known. They don't need to establish a level of credibility. They have it, but they've never really utilized LinkedIn for whatever reason. And probably because they didn't need to.
Right.
But you know, we live in COVID world now, where we're not going to trade shows and conferences and networking meetings and, you know, all of the above. And so more and more people are realizing that this is a great time and a great opportunity to focus on their LinkedIn presence. And most of these folks have been on LinkedIn for a long time, right? They probably have had profiles for more than 10 years, but have never really done anything with it. And they're really fun to work with. They're really fun because they, there's so much to talk about. There's so much, you know, like story to condense into a profile that really showcases who they are and what their expertise is. Um, and then the real fun is like helping them figure out, well, how do they want to utilize it? Do they want to do it for targeting? Are they trying to get credibility and thought leadership? You know, what kind of content do they want to be posting? Like they're a fun group. I'm enjoying working with them a lot.
Well, Rachel, I love your enthusiasm for what you're doing now, and I'm sure you're helping those clients immensely, especially in times of, you know, the pandemic that's going on in terms, and how people, especially who are used to going out and networking in person, need LinkedIn as well as other online you know, platforms to be able to engage with their prospects and customers and continue to grow their business. So they have to adapt to those changes, you know, to succeed. Well, I really appreciate the time you took today, Rachel. This has been really fascinating. It's really interesting to just hear how you evolved your career from nonprofit to, you know, really a full-time marketing consultant to now kind of growing your own specialized LinkedIn, you know, connect the dots business, which has been great. Thanks so much for taking the time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks everybody for watching. This is another edition of Adapt2Changes interview series. I'm Bret Rachlin. Have a good day.